We are recording now. Hello, Brian. How are you?
Hey, Haley, it's exciting to know that you're going to be in Florida tomorrow.
I know. I'm very
And
excited because I am freezing in
yeah,
California, so I need
well,
sun and heat.
it's nice, and we'll have the shared heat of our friendship, our new
Indeed.
friendship. Yes.
Indeed.
So our program that you and I started conversation a month ago and decided to record them is entitled, as I think most folks know, "Are You Happy Without the Movie?" And basically, our focus is how do people find their light and have the courage to let it shine. And I said, oh, we really have to have on in conversation with us my dearest friend Deb Dagit, who is just an amazing force of life. Everybody who encounters her just is in awe, not not just because of her story, but because of who she is as a person. I mean, she's a dynamo. And the story that and Deb, you correct me. This is Deb, my friend Deb Dagit. Deb, where are you, Deb? You're in. You live in a cool house by the river that your husband Dan fishes in. But where is it located again?
It's in central rural New Jersey. So it's actually, as the crow flies, an hour due west of Manhattan, but it's the part of the state that's called the Garden State.
Yes, and it is the Garden State. I did a lot of training at facilities, AT&T and Lucent, all around New Jersey. But Deb is an independent consultant now, dealing with a variety of issues, but she is well known for being sort of one of the nation's leading speakers on disability and how to create a workplace in which people with disabilities feel safe and valued, which are the words that I use, and talking about creating space for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people in the workplace. And but real quick, and you challenged me, but when Deb was born, the doctor told her parents that she wasn't going to live, and then she was never going to walk, and that she'd never go to school. And progressively, when she defied them by living and by walking, and then she should understand she's never going to have a job, right? Well, I met Deb when she was global head of diversity and inclusion for Merck. She had me come in, and she has a commanding presence, and at Merck made a huge difference in the corporation's understanding of diversity and inclusion and why it was different than human resources. Deb, am I right so far?
That is factually accurate, yes.
Yes. And Deb had a really challenging early life in terms she has a degenerative bone disease. Am I using the right terminology?
It's congenital, which means I was born with it, and it affects all the collagen in the body, inclusive of the bones. But people often refer to it as brittle bones. But
Brittle bone.
The medical term is osteogenesis imperfecta.
And the reality of it is that if Deb falls, then she goes to the hospital because she will have broken something. She and Dan, her husband, came to Provincetown to spend time with Ray and me. And on the first day of their vacation, on the motorized scooter that they were on, it tipped, and they had to leave. But one more thing, and then I'll be quiet. Deb's for a minute. Deb's husband Dan is an extraordinary human being also. And he is the person who enables Deb to travel globally, to do presentations on not just disability, but also, Deb, on race and gender and age.
Sexual orientation, veteran status, generations, anything relative to the different demographics that are in the global workforce.
But your passion is disability. Is that safe to say?
It is more recently, the reason being that as we were coming up on the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, a number of years ago, about 8 years ago, or 5 years ago, I should say, the unemployment rate of people with disabilities had not moved. And I had not met one other person in my global travels who identified as living with an apparent or non-apparent disability in any kind of an HR or other executive leadership role. And so I wanted to spend the last decade or so of my career redoubling my efforts and getting more creative in the disability space, because we had seen progress with all the other dimensions of difference, but we had an intractable problem. And so I felt like my own tribe needed more of my attention.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are a diversity leader, you are told both explicitly and implicitly not to focus on your own demographic.
Mm-hmm.
Because then people in the workforce don't think you care about them as much.
Well,
so I needed to go into an external role in order to be able to focus more on that population. I still like the general work and all the intersections, but the disability piece definitely needed more effort and innovation. And fortunately, the universe gave me lots of ways to get to do that. So I was able to really dive in a big way and see a lot of progress.
When you were little, you had, I think, at least 40 operations on your legs. You spent much of your childhood in a hospital.
That's right. I've had about 70 major broken bones and somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 operations. And this is an interesting condition in that you're more fragile pre-puberty and then after menopause. So my fragility now is similar to how it was when I was a child. So I have to be a lot more careful.
Wow.
But most of the fractures happened before I was 16. And then they tapered off and I got a bit of a break where they were less frequent. And then they've crept back up again since my 50th birthday, which was 11 and a half years ago.
Okay. And then one final description, Hayley, that I don't know if you know. And then I want to have us talk to get Deb to talk about how did she, what was her hero's journey?
Mm-hmm.
How did she really take all the stuff that was going on in her life and find in it her voice and know clearly where she was going? But before I tell you that, Deb and Dan are parents. They went to Russia and asked to go to the orphanage for unadoptable children and brought back 3 children from a placement center for children that were unadoptable, and have raised them and watched them become thriving, happy adults. Pretty something, huh?
That's amazing.
So Deb, isn't it? And so Deb, there had to be times when you were young that when did you know that you had, that you were on a mission and that you clearly there was more going on in your soul then was apparent to doctors and maybe even your folks. I mean, I don't know about what that was like, but what was it? How did you know? Like, I knew that I had these attractions and that I was living in a world in which I didn't know if anyone else had those feelings, and it was scary as hell. Talk about, if you would, your own experience.
Well, what's interesting about my condition is, unlike, childhood cancer or something like that, you're not really ill. I mean, when you first go in the hospital, you're just incarcerated and bored. So I guess I figured it out at a pretty young age that they don't do this anymore. But back then, once you broke something or had surgery, you had to be in bed for at least 6 weeks for it to heal. And after, as a child, maybe 48 hours, it was just a waiting game. And I became, I compare it to being like a trustee in a prison. I figured out how everything worked in a hospital. And so when new kids, girls, would come under the girls' ward, I became very adept at getting them to move from being afraid and crying and really stressed to seeing how you could have fun and how to get what you wanted. And they tended to be children from very diverse backgrounds. Some of them spoke limited English. They were all different races and different kinds of conditions. People with burns, people who had what used to be called birth defects, like clubfoot. And what the turning point, the kind of click in my brain for me was I was given the nickname Pixie, and I think that was in part because Peter Pan was really popular then. And I in fact, I even played Peter Pan at Halloween because I had an uncanny resemblance with the pointy ears and everything. And I started to think when I broke a bone or needed surgery that I was happier at the hospital than I was at home. And it wasn't because I had a terrible home life, but when I went to school and had tutors and was in my neighborhood, there was very little I was allowed to do because I might break something. But when I was in the hospital, I was a valued asset and ally who got special treatment because I took care of people feeling vulnerable. And that was a change in how to look at the situation. I got to do something most people didn't get to do. And I was not particularly like high IQ smart, but I was precocious in that I preferred the company of adults. And so pleasing adults, including doctors and nurses, gave me great pleasure. And then when I got out of having to go to the hospital all the time and actually got to be in my high school, that was right after the Vietnam War, and I was in Oregon, and there was not a lot of diversity in my school. Nobody else, not even one other person with a disability, and there was 3,000 students at my high school. But there were refugees from Vietnam. There were, I think, a total of 5 people who identified as African American. There were quite a few people who, although not out, nor having the language that we use today for the LGBTQ plus population, a lot of people who were gay. And anyway, that became my tribe because there wasn't another person with a disability. And similar to the hospital, I could help students that felt different in a whole host of different ways because I understood school culture. And I got to learn a lot about what we now call diversity and inclusion. So,
the hospital had other young people your age who didn't emerge into this role as you did. What was
Right.
going, you know, have you reflected on why you and what, and do you have any sense of calling? Do you believe in a calling?
Yeah, I did. It was a calling, but someone a few months ago, I've had people say, "Oh, you should write a book." How many times have we all heard that? I know you guys talk about like make a movie, but for me, it's always, well, you should write a book. Well, if I were going to write a book, one of my clients suggested that the title should be "The Little Positive Deviant."
That's a really good label. I like that.
So, positive deviance is when people figure out how to make the best of a situation that face value doesn't look good, like who would want that? And I guess I more often than not thought I was lucky to be in this form. Like I was put here in this form on purpose, and for good reason. And I watched other people who were not as physically different or challenged as me struggle with self-esteem and identity and purpose and figuring out what they wanted to do. And that wasn't on the agenda for me to have to figure out. It was apparent even when I didn't have language for it.
Sorry, Deb. I was just going to ask, not having to figure things out, but when you were at that young age and obviously, figuring out how to move around a hospital, when you saw other kids there, did you see them as kids with disabilities or kids that were going through a tough time, or did you just see them as their light? How did you see other kids that were in similar situations?
I saw their struggle. Unfortunately, the hard part of all of that was I was well into my 20s before I had any long-term relationships with anyone. A person in the hospital, I was the outlier, not only because of my bone condition, but there were hardly any other children I ever ran across that weren't there for a short period of time. Right. So, and I didn't see the same people over and over again. They would come in, get fixed, and then we wouldn't cross paths again. And the same was true in high school. I was not allowed to go to a school that was anywhere near where I lived. I had to take a taxi every day, about 45 minutes from my home with my parents to the high school, because it was the only high school that was mostly accessible. And I was a wheelchair user. And so they didn't have a bus with a lift on it. And so the school district paid a local cab company to haul me and my wheelchair back and forth, which meant I couldn't stay after school. The people I was going to school with, if they were going to hang out with each other after school, it was way too far away, and my parents weren't willing to drive me that far to go to their homes. So the way you asked the question, Hayley, is I saw people, I guess, especially as I got older and I started getting involved in directing plays when I was like a sophomore in high school, and that stayed through college. And I also did competitive speaking. I would say during that age range, from maybe 15 to 23-ish, I saw people's gifts, but I saw their pain and how I could relieve it. And I guess if you have a health condition that's predicated on managing pain and avoiding pain, you're kind of predestined to want others not to experience pain, whether it's physical or emotional. And I could see it and I could relieve it, like an empath, where without them having to give it words what it is and what would help. And And sometimes what would help, that was a harder lesson for me to learn, that I still have to keep practicing, is sometimes what helps someone else is you being vulnerable and allowing others to help you.
Absolutely.
And the older I get, the more I allow that to be a part of how I connect with people, and teach other people that skill set, like how to be vulnerable, especially people who do what I do for a living. There is no more effective way to get men in particular who have a lot of power to share their power and get involved in diversity and inclusion work than to give them something to do. Men are pre-wired to fix things. They want to fix things. So I come with a lot of things you could fix.
But you don't really need them to fix it.
No, but it makes, if we're getting to know each other. So my mother said when I wanted to get fake ID to get into the bars with my friends, that I didn't need it because I could shoplift a canoe and no one would stop me, right? However, if I were an executive or a vice president role, they also had to know that I could do whatever the mighty task was, right? And so I had to navigate that fine line from when I first met them, letting them help me with something, which made them feel good, and then convincing them to letting me help shoplift a canoe, which is sometimes what it takes to make diversity and inclusion happen. You have to do things that the company's never tried before, that the legal department shakes their head, and so you kind of work up the scale from, usually I would start with something like, well, for me to come see you, I would need a parking spot near where your office is, and there is not one right now. You're an executive. Can you help me with that? That would be like, I mean, people would love a request like that, as small as it was. They could call up the facilities department and put out a couple orange cones, and they could call security and say, when she comes to the gate, let her right on through and all that. And they would tell their family and their colleagues how they did that, right? Then I would keep moving up the scale. Okay, you did great on that parking spot. So the next thing I'd like you to do is, we're going to have an employee group for people who are from a different group than you. I'd love you to be the executive sponsor. Not quite as easy as the parking spot, but I can coach you through it. So yeah, it was a good starting place.
I have a background in corporate, and I was fortunate enough, which I understand, to always be in workplaces that had some kind of disability ease to them, some kind. From the perspective of somebody that needs that kind of stuff, how does it feel when it's not there?
Well, it's exhausting and scary. So you have to use up a ton of energy to figure out a workaround. And you have to always be on guard, because you never know when you're going to run into something else that doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And in my case, I could get hurt at work, and then they would regret that they hired me. And I guess the other aspect was people meeting me for the first time. It took a lot of energy to build a relationship, especially if they were from a different part of the world where people with disabilities are not visible in society. And they may have talked to me many times via email or over the phone, but there was always a shock and awe moment when they walked into my office, and it would take them quite a while to recover. And so the fact that we didn't have education and training, it was, getting to know me that was their education and training. Now more corporations to your point, Hayley, do proactive education and help people to be more disability confident. So it's not all on the person who has a visible disability to try to get through those moments all day long, every day. It is exhausting.
Mhm.
That is one of the reasons why, if you belong to a group that is visibly disabled, you'll often see that people end up having a partner, a life partner that has a similar condition, because it becomes an oasis at the end of interacting with the general public, that I can go home and not deal with, all that energy it takes to make somebody feel comfortable.
Hmm.
And you can, without words, express the challenges of being either a wheelchair user or a little person or whatever it is.
Or gay or transgender.
Okay, right.
Yeah. There's so many transgender people have transgender partners. And because it's, I think that you don't have to fill in the blanks.
Right.
But Deb, what about when you were growing up, how important was spirituality or faith in your family? And did that guide you at all in through these surgeries and challenges? And has it changed at all for you in your terms of your view about what's beyond you and how you're being used?
Well, no one in my family was active in going anywhere on Saturday or Sunday or talking about faith.
Okay.
So no, that wasn't a part of my journey. When I was in Shriners Hospital, they would allow at that point in time people to proselytize to the kids. So I was saved probably at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, in some denomination of Christianity. And when I did explore going to church with friends out of curiosity, or asked my dad to take me to a church just to learn, I was uncomfortable with the fact that I was the object of prayer, and there but for the grace of God go I, and was seen as someone who would engage in that community, in that faith community, except as for charitable fundraising and the object of pity. So I was not interested. Interestingly, my mother believes in the Shirley MacLaine type of spirituality, as a shorthand, with crystals and everything that goes with that.
The migration of the soul, right?
Right, but also that it's that we are all part of the same and all of that. And it's interesting because the two faiths I like are opposite explanations of how someone like me shows up in the world spiritually. I love Buddhism, and when I went to Thailand, I felt very comfortable there. People helping me felt really comfortable, in the bows and all of that. And I got that by helping me, it would help them to get to the next level. And in Buddhist faith, people who are doing really well in society have earned that over time by their good work. But interestingly, my mother's belief is that you keep having to have a harder and a harder and a harder life until you've had a hard enough life that you don't have to come back anymore. And so Dan likes to tease me that I must have had a Nazi youth or something like that, because we joke about which is it. If you were going to pick one of those two things, am I, nearing the final, trip around the sun here in a corporal being, because I have suffered enough in previous lives, or is it? I don't know. So I find it confusing. How do I really feel? I feel guided by a higher power. I feel very clear about why I'm here. I don't ever wonder about that.
What's the answer to that? Why are you here?
I'm here to help people realize their potential.
So that's your mission. That's your light.
Right. So I love directing plays. As I said before, life is a big play. And if you're a director, you bring out the best in every performance, whether it's a small part or the star of the show, whether it's the CEO or the college kid that's doing their first internship, and one is not more important than the other. And when I meet someone, I'm always thinking, how can I bring out the best in the performance that's their life, the reason that they're here, by helping them to find their own truth, their own strength, not for me to give them anything, but to be the mirror, and to show them what's possible in their life that's being blocked for some reason from them knowing.
Deb, in my line of work, my line of being, I should say, I get a lot of questions, which you sort of alluded to a little bit earlier on, in terms of, if there is a God, how could he allow this to happen to somebody? And, from the outside, just looking at you from sort of that human physical body perspective, somebody would say, if there is a God, how could he allow this to happen? I have a completely different viewpoint, because I don't necessarily see the disabilities. I see the light, and I see the joy, and the amazing life that you've had now. But what would you say, or how would you sort of ease somebody through that understanding that your life is still value?
When you look back at the biggest challenges that you've had in your life, often those are the points in time that there was the greatest gift on the other side. Yeah. And if you can keep noticing that over and over again, then while you're in the thick of things, the next time the bad thing happens, you start to think, what gift am I going to get as a result of that? Mm-hmm. And if you keep doing that all the way to the end of your life, then the gift is what you're going to do next, whether you come back as a human being or there's something else you're going towards. But it requires that reflection and noticing. I mean, it's just kind of a silly, trite song, but what doesn't kill you does in fact make you stronger if you're willing to notice that and leverage it. When I've had to do things that were really scary to other people, like public speaking or presenting to the board of a company or adopting those kids from Russia, which was terrifying because of how we were seen and treated while we were there. I in the moment was thinking about what was going to be on the other side, and I was able to have the value of being able to tell myself, well, this may be tough, but it's not anywhere near as awful as breaking a major bone in your body or going through a major surgery. That is outside your control. And your ability to maintain sentience with red hot pain, searing pain, is very hard. It's very dehumanizing. So even facing really scary circumstances that most people would find high anxiety producing weren't as bad as a broken bone. Mm-hmm. So I guess I always had that comparator perspective as well.
When you said, Deb, a minute ago, I think I heard you say that you were grateful for the experience of being a little person and having faced the challenges. I feel the same way about being gay, and feel that my life would have been much less rich if I had been born, a heterosexual guy who sort of had, coasted through a lot of things because I floated with the crowd. My personal belief, I was going to ask you, like, who inspired you if, before these Shriners got a hold of you. Hayley and I at some point want to talk about the influence of religion on because we had different religious experiences growing up. But the lives of the saints, I reacted to it as being stories about people who had a strength of conviction and often did for others. And so if I was in a situation where I was looking for a role model, as a young kid, they always had saints that were your age they would tell you about, so it wouldn't be a stretch to think, well, maybe I'm like so-and-so. Who were your role models growing up, Deb? What book did you read, or what story did you hear that somehow comforted or guided you through what I know still remain today as haunting experiences?
Well, interestingly, I, as a child, liked science fiction. And so it wasn't a faith leader or real people. It was people in books that were part of a different time and space, usually either another planet, like the Dune books. There was actually a series of books I read where the main character had brittle bones, but because it was in the future, they had like a suit they could wear where they wouldn't break things. The J.R.R. Tolkien books, the Hobbit, any of those kinds, and I felt so non-human before I met my husband Dan. I didn't identify with a gender or a sexual orientation because people treated me as androgynous. And even my mom said, the term she used for me is that I was a walk-in, which is a term used to describe someone that wasn't necessarily meant to be with that family, but the spirit chose that life to walk in. And she always told me that I was the mother and she was the daughter. And so there was both reinforcement of being other. I always had a nickname that was not human. Pixie, Hobbit, Yoda were names, and people still call me Yoda. People who've never met each other call me Yoda. And so when I was in my 20s and 30s, that's not exactly the most flattering comparison.
No, but I want to be Yoda. I will take him. I want to be.
Well, now there's a baby Yoda that's a lot cooler looking. I think.
Yeah.
Yoda.
I want to be Gandalf.
Yeah.
Merlin.
Yeah. I loved Star Trek when I was a kid. I was like an early adopter of that whole, way of thinking about it and seeing what's possible in the world. And I often felt like I came from a place that was more like what I read about and the science fiction that I enjoyed. And how like a Superman came from, a different place and had to help human beings. That was the easiest way for me to understand my role. And that my kryptonite was my brittle bones, but that I was here in my own way to save people from themselves, not from other things, from themselves.
Do you feel more human now and more sort of like belonging?
I do when I'm home with my family. When I go out in the world, the way the world experiences me lets me know that I'm not to them. for better or for worse, whether it's exalted or intimidated or curious. I wrote an article back in 1991 that my choices when I meet someone is, am I a leprechaun, a gnome, or an extraterrestrial? Because basically how the world reacted to me was one of those three categories. They either avoided me altogether, the gnome or the troll, and were worried about, you know, something bad I might do to them, or I might rub off, like they could get brittle bones from hanging out with me, or they thought I was lucky. This happens a lot with homeless people who want to touch me in order to have something good happen. But other people too, like just by being in my presence, something good might happen, even if we haven't had a conversation yet. And then the ET is, where do you buy your clothes? How do you drive a car? How do you reach things in your kitchen? I mean, the endless curiosity. And so because I still experience that when I'm with people I don't know yet. Obviously, if I'm friends with people, that goes away. But the safest place to be is home, where people don't think any of those things.
Mm-hmm. The one thing I was going to say, the second example you gave was that people thought that, you know, were attracted to you like a lucky charm, that something. But Deb, I think people are attracted to positive energy.
Yeah,
they're attracted to bright light. I mean, what attracts me to you as my friend, as a dear friend, is, you know, is your energy, your loving energy. You know, I know that you're an extraordinarily important and special light source. I see it, and so I'm attracted to it, not because I think I'm going to get good fortune from you, but because I expect to be understood, not just as a gay man, but as a spiritual being who has a mission to help people. I mean, I think that's where you and I, and Hayley, but I mean, you and I, in terms of our oppression experiences, I think are I don't know what drives you to me, but besides, you know, charming and, you know, good looking and smart and all that, good cook, and but don't you, can you identify with that? You know, what's that?
We have a time limit, Brian.
Oh, sorry. I probably went on.
No, I agree. I mean, I think I do own that I have a positive light, and I've had people who say they see auras, or who say that they have the power to see beyond what others see, say something to that effect, even when they first met me. And I own that. But I think that your energy, Brian, and yours, Hayley, it comes from any of us who are fully present with our purpose in life and are able to own who we are fully. And whenever you encounter someone like that, you know right away. It's people who are constantly fighting some inner battle that aren't able to engage with others. They can't, if you can't be there for yourself, if you don't know yourself, if you don't know your purpose, it's really hard to show up in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's really fun and interesting to meet people and immediately know in so many different ways that they are in harmony with why they're here and are in knowing with it, and that they can engage with other human beings to help them on that journey. But it's obvious.
Yeah, I learned to get really comfortable and sort of own my showing up, because, you know, my take on why people are so interested is I think they instantly feel better about themselves just being around you. And I used to get so frustrated that I like sitting by myself. So I would go into a public place and purposely sit away from the crowd. And literally 2 minutes later, the crowd moves to where I am. And I'm just like, I just want to be on my own. Do you have to sit on me? And I actually was like complaining about this to my friend, and she's like, it's not a bad thing. It's this really great thing that people feel good around you. That's part of why you're here. And that really helped to ground me into my own presence. And it's also allowed me to have some fun with it because, proving to myself, but also to other people, it's one of the things when they're around me, they're like, oh, watch what happens when Hayley sits down. And then I'll get up and move, and people will move. And like 2 minutes later, they will move to be around me. And it's not like they're moving around me. They're literally sitting on top of me. So it's a very interesting sort of experience for me because there is that gratitude, there is the owning and showing up, but sometimes there's the, man, guys, I just want to be on my own.
Hayley, what I wonder is when you get older, if this will change for you, in that I've noticed as I've gotten older, and Brian, I don't know if this is true for you too, that energy you're talking about, it's now on a dimmer switch.
Got you.
Sometimes it's really high and it's kind of like you just described. And then other times I can feel it turn down because I've used up more than I have to give. And so one of the gifts of COVID-19 is that I can stay on bright longer, because what makes the dimmer switch go down is the energy that it takes to be in the world as a person with a disability, to get from point A to point B, to deal with the energy of people who are struggling, because it isn't infinite. The energy is not infinite. And I find myself being more and more selective about who I lend it to.
Absolutely.
And the Yoda comparison is a good one, in that Yoda didn't teach everyone to be a Jedi warrior. It was the ones who wanted to and had the ability to. And I find myself, even though I'm not ancient or anything, at 61, I definitely look for Jedi warriors now. And I often find myself recharging my battery because it's not going to be able to stay on bright as much as it could when I was younger.
I think it's really
is it possible? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Brian, we're actually almost up to the full hour.
Oh, I knew that we were going to go the whole time with Deb, that there was no way.
I would love to possibly have you back, Deb, and actually explore that sort of boundary topic around your energy, or one's energy, and being able to sort of work with that dimmer.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're ancient, but not because of your age. I think you're an old soul, and I know it's a trite thing, but I think you're an ancient soul who is having this human experience that you're having because it's the exact one that the world needed you to be in order to hear what it needed to hear from you. Same thing with me. Deb, you've heard me say the messenger is the message. Beyond what comes out of our mouth is just people look and say, I want to be with this person. Hayley, backing up on what you said, I want to be around this person. They have something that is attractive to me, that I want to be part of, that I want to, right? So, but I can also identify with your saying that at some point, and sometimes when you don't turn down the dimmer down, you can overwhelm people. Absolutely. I know I can overwhelm people because I want so much to make a difference. that I go beyond, what at that moment is needed or called for. So,
Deb,
so this is, I can't believe it's already over.
I could go on forever, but I do have one sort of last question for you, Deb. And this is again coming from my corporate experience, but also just an everyday experience. What is, or do you have sort of top 3 tips or top 5 of sort of what someone like me should consider or should open their mind to when they're going through everyday life to sort of try and understand a different experience or the different experience of somebody with disabilities?
I think one is to ask the person what they need from you, and given the energy that you have, they'll probably tell you. And it may be something that surprises you. So I think one, not being afraid to ask what someone needs. 2, wanting to get to know people beyond how they present. And because sometimes people with disabilities find that they're talking about what's obvious all the time and not what's not so obvious. And then I'm a person, you kind of have to figure out what makes people tick, but I'm a person who's known for having a really great network, and I have an insatiable desire to constantly add to it, because the answers that people need are not necessarily what I could say or do, but what someone I know and love and care about could say or do for that person. So a great gift to me is always to expand all the treasures in terms of connections that are out there. Each person's going to be a little different in that regard, but find out what they are energized by. That's what energizes me. For them, it might be something completely different. It might be photography, it might be faith, it might be being out in nature. But if you want to give someone a gift, you need to find out what it is that makes their bright light stay on more often and brighter.
Thank you.
And what you share too, right? I mean, what I love is when we get beyond what does it mean to be, when you leave the role of educator. Right. Sometimes you just get so tired. It's your calling, but over dinner at a friend's, and you're educated, but when you can get past that, and people forget, that you have a disability, or that you're gay, or that you're Black. I mean, I know everyone hates hearing, I don't see color, and that's ridiculous, right? I want people to know that I'm gay. I want them to get their arms around that. But when we talk at some point, I want to talk about how that movie made us both feel. We connecting with each other at a soul level, not in the box that we're currently occupying.
Good point.
Yeah.
Right, guys, I know we could all chat for much longer, but we do have 2 minutes left. So Deb, do you have any questions or any sort of last thoughts that you wanted to throw in, knowing that there's going to be a part 2?
Right. No, I don't think so. I look forward to watching this series and hearing the conversations that you're having with others. And as you're looking for people to talk to, that you're looking for a particular point of view, let me know, because as I said, I like making those connections, and I'm happy to help you find what you're looking for.
Thank you so much.
I reached out to Christy. I haven't heard back. I think she'd be great.
Yeah.
Christy Hardwick.
Yep.
Yeah. But Deb, so this is my last question. When you hang up and Dan says, how'd it go? Did we come close to talking about what's real for you?
Definitely. I would say, I would tell Dan it was a fun conversation. I look forward to future conversations, and that, as I said before, I really want to hear how the other dialogues that you have go, because this isn't a level of knowing each other that you normally get.
Mhm.
And I would enjoy as much listening, if not more, than participating, just to hear this kind of a conversation with other people.
Well, I definitely want to keep, have another one with you. But this whole thing happened because Hayley and I, we got introduced by a mutual friend, and we said, well, let's spend more time. And Hayley said, well, let's have a conversation on the phone. And then we said, well, why don't we record this? This is good stuff. And that's how it happened. It's we've only had one other guest. We're just in our infancy, but I think there are people out there who would get a lot out of the conversation, especially hearing, you talking about your own journey. And I loved it. So
I loved it too. And having a personal experience makes all the difference too.
I have a suggestion that you're probably already doing, but that will make it richer for those who are listening, is try to get all of your guests to tell you stories to illustrate the answers that you're asking. I've learned how important storytelling is. And people will have a tendency to get factual or analytical or use metaphors or analogies. But if you can get them to say, tell me a story about how that happened, you'll get a lot more participants, and you'll get them to get out of their intellectual way of talking about their life and more from the heart.
Yep. Because we're all related. I mean, we're all part of this family, and the stories help remind us of that. That's where we find the shared experiences.
Right. Well, Hayley, nice to meet you, Brian. Much love to you and Ray. Give Ray a gentle hug for me, and I hope you both stay safe and have a joyous holiday.
You too, Deb.
Lots of
Thank you, honey.
Lots of love to you, Brian, and we will see you soon.
Good.
Right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.